Welcome to Public Space, a community dedicated to supporting individuals who have experienced religious trauma or find themselves in between and are looking for self-God as well as community. We exist beyond the four walls of colonized religion. Here, we create a safe and vibrant space where members can explore and share spirituality, stories, art, and intellectual inquiry through critical dialogue. Join us as we embark on a journey of healing, self-discovery, and creative expression. Together, we will foster a supportive community that empowers individuals to reclaim their voice, embrace their unique journeys, embody a Path-Maker Archetype, and find solace and strength in the company of like-minded individuals.
Greetings, Pathmakers, and welcome to Season 2. The trail is different, and what we're packing and what we're sharing this season is different as well. This season, we plan to have more engaging dialogues with individuals while off path. So enjoy the following dialogue, as it may inform you and add to your toolkit while you trek life beyond religion, especially colonized religion. See you out there. Today, we have an amazing honor to be with Cynthia, and we're just going to let her start off by introducing herself, telling us a little bit about herself and her work, her amazing work off path. But let's get into it. Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm Cynthia Abulafia. I am a yoga teacher and yoga therapist, as well as an author and an educator. I have a book coming out called Embodying the Goddess: How to Awaken Curiosity and Reverence on the Spiritual Path. And one of the things that I'm most passionate about is teaching the sacred texts of yoga, tantra, and those sister traditions, and beginning to address or even counter what I call the transcendence bias in religion and spirituality by coming back home to embodiment and paying attention to where in history, why in history that part of the conversation was left out, and now what we can do about it.
That is amazing, powerful. If you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit, like, how did you get into this? How did this cross your path?
Yeah, so I didn't start off studying goddess traditions and lineages. It's not where I started. I did start off as a yoga teacher, but it was probably the most honest answer to this, Erin, is that it was a series of trips and falls and perhaps a series of spiritual emergencies, spiritual crises, Kundalini awakening, and then investigating what's actually happening here, what is the history to what's happening here, what's happening in the people around me that I'm connecting with that are also experiencing this, and is there a precedence in history for what I'm experiencing spiritually? Because at that point in time, what I had been reading was not reflecting what I was experiencing directly. And it took me over 10 years just to orient, like, just to even orient that what I was dealing with was a different tradition altogether, that even though I was in the yoga tradition studying and teaching them, that there were other traditions that at that point in time were very, very hidden, still are pretty hidden, but are starting to emerge now. And it's within those traditions, talking about the divine feminine, talking about goddess, that I began to understand really what was going on with me and, like, why was that taken out of the conversation?
Yeah, that's a good point. We empathize, right? From our background, we stepped out of religion for these similar reasons, the things we were encountering. When we were studying our Masters of Divinity in seminary, a lot of different things were coming up that was more inside than outside. On the outside, everybody was, more or less the same, this Christ-like focus, right? But then inside, I had this storm going, and it was like of curiosity, interest, exploration, asking a lot of questions. So similarly, you went through such an incredibly difficult yet rewarding journey. What are some rewards do you think that came about thus far when you answered this path or this calling to explore more and embody, these new beliefs and ideas and understandings?
I think what you just said is really useful, which is curiosity. It has allowed me to unpack my curiosity. I don't know what your experience of religion is, but I know that for me personally, a lot of times the religions I've encountered have not encouraged curiosity. It's more like sit down, don't ask questions, or if you're going to ask the questions that I've pre or like I've already put through what I deem appropriate to ask. And so long as I can give you the answer that I'm queuing up for you, now you can ask those questions. So I think dismantling curiosity is something that deconditions and has helped me decondition myself because I hold conditioning patterns within myself. So that's been one of the most beautiful and useful tools that has developed in my inquiry. But also storytelling and hearing other people's stories. A lot of times, storytelling makes us human to each other. I can hear what your experience of life is, what your experience of the divine is. Sometimes that correlates with something that is in a sanctioned text, and sometimes it doesn't. So I'd like to hear what you've experienced personally that lateralizes us. Now, all of a sudden, instead of like towing the line into what's correct or not correct, it's just simply the sharing of stories. And the more I've shared my story with other people, but really mostly the more I have listened to other people and their stories and their experiences of direct contact with the divine, however it is they define that. That to me has been the greatest gift. I hope to continue to be more and more curious and listen more and more to what other people are sharing.
Yeah, that's a good point. You brought up a very good point. And you also brought up kind of my next inquiry, right? And it's really about how did you respond to the unknown? Because we get to this point where, like you're mentioning, we have this interest and then we inquire and then we find something for ourselves. And that something is not what we found in the doctrine or in the laid out rules, so to speak. It's beyond that and it's unknown. And I know for me personally, initial feeling was afraid. It's different. It's unknown. I don't know if it's safe. I don't know if it'll hold me. I don't know if it's for me. All
Am I
these things.
included? Yeah.
Yeah, of course, like, and so a lot of this was just being in the unknown or embodying the unknown. And how has that been for you, if any? Can you relate?
Oh, I can definitely relate. I think that for me, being in the unknown isn't some threshold I've ever crossed. I think that I remain in the unknown. That is part of what makes life exciting to me, is not knowing, is treating it as an unfolding mystery. There's something I teach, which is that in so many of our religions that are based on transcendence, where transcendence really is religion. Religion is a transcendent experience, which is a death and dying experience. It's an experience to move beyond form. It's an experience to move beyond body. It's an experience to have salvation from the body, have salvation from the form. And when you do the opposite, which is coming from an open perspective and then experiencing what it's like to condense into form. Oh, here's a thought. I've just condensed. Oh, here's a perception. I've just condensed. Oh, here's a memory. I've just condensed. If you track that again and again and again, basically flip the religious trajectory on its head, or I even would say complete the circle. Start at the open space and then condense into form again and again and again, then something about the mystery remains. And now all of a sudden, the coming into form, the coming into body is the great mystery. It's the great mystery is still here, even though it feels like it has an edge to it. I have a body that has an edge. There's a space around my body. I have a thought. I have an emotion. The emotion happens to be a thought that's just looping around and around in a circle. But if I track that coming into being again and again and again, that is where mystery starts to infuse itself into life. And I would even say to this particular question that I'm not sure what isn't a mystery. I don't know what's ordinary anymore. I know what people call ordinary. I know what people call ordinary life. But to me, the mystery, the more you turn toward what's called ordinary life, the more that is just such a strange, wild thing. How odd that here we are, that here I am thinking I have some localized form. Like, what a weird, illogical, actually logically impossible thing to think that I am this limited human being named Cynthia with like two kids and a job. I wake up in the morning, which is super weird, and I live that life, and I hold my cup of coffee in the morning as though this is perfectly normal. Like, you know, all the meanwhile, I have these senses that are issuing forth from what? From where? I have this mind that is thinking from what? From where? And life just pours forth in this way that the second I think I've understood the mystery, I think is the second I'll just be absolutely not curious anymore. To me, curiosity and reverence is staying open to the fundamental I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah, we agree with you. There is something divine about not knowing that in religion, it's not spoken about in that kind of frame or in that kind of perspective. That not knowing is actually beautiful, because we do live in a society. Well, I can speak from Western culture society where this indoctrination is in the background that we must know things, that we have an idea that we do know things. We have facts, stuff like that. So, and people will climb the ladder of education and feel that they've, reached the top and that they know enough for something or they know something. But like going back to any spiritual guru or any spiritual practitioner, it's once we think we grasped it, it's gone, right? Similar to the Tao, in Taoism. The moment you think you have the Tao, you don't, or this concept of we can never obtain it. We can only really try to imagine it or hope for it. But that for me, I feel like it's like that because we're supposed to create some original way to get there. We're not supposed to all do it the same way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, but that is the Western model, right? And Western academia is built on Western religion. So our academic priorities are always going to be based on our religious indoctrination. Our academic institutions started off as religious institutions. Now we've just put science in there instead, which is basically our religion now because we're so scared of so much trauma there that we know, okay, well, I don't know that I trust that anymore. Some of us still do. But now I'm going to turn to science, but all we've done is made the switch from the one thing to the other thing. Here's a fact that I find really beautiful studying the sacred texts of yoga and tantra. And that is that when a teacher, a really great teacher in those traditions, has something new to say, has something innovative to say, they go out of their way to claim this isn't new. I didn't make this up. In fact, a lot of times when you read a great teacher, especially in the tantric traditions that I read, whenever a teacher goes out of their way in a text to say, I didn't make this up, you can be pretty sure that they're making something up. But in those traditions, the worldview is very different from our Western modern. I'm not going to even say Western because now it's modern transnational worldview. Hyper individualization, hyper self actualization, me as an individual, me as an individual. And the thing that makes me successful as an individual now is like writing a paper where I have to convince you that everything I'm saying is brand new and original. So we're deeply embedded. I'm doing something new. I'm doing something original. Nobody has ever said this before. Please support my study. Please support my scientific study because nobody's done it before. This is how we approach academia. This is how we approach religion. This is how we approach marketing. And yet, traditionally speaking, in so many cultures, it would have been that the value is placed on the opposite, not calling yourself out as starting something new, because if I call myself out as starting something new, who are my teachers? Where's my lineage? Where's the wisdom that that comes out of? Prove to me where this has been said in a previous sacred text. And like, how long ago was that? Because the more that text has been vetted, the more that text has been studied, the more we can now be like, okay, I'm going to trust what you have to say because you're not saying something new. You're saying something that history has shown us, that our practices have shown us over and over again. So we have it almost exactly backwards in our modern time compared to some of these traditions. And here we are in this time period projecting our values onto texts that have almost the opposite values. The values there that say, investigate, investigate because this tradition says so, investigate because hundreds of years of history, hundreds of years of teachers have suggested it. So, to be a voice as part of a chorus, to be a voice as part of a dialogue, as opposed to what we see nowadays, I'm saying something new, so pay attention to me. It's kind of scary to say something new, isn't it? I mean, in a certain sense, I think that there's a reason for us to want to stand out and to be seen as particular and individual, and that's beautiful, and there's a coming home to ourselves in that process. There's so much dismantling that we need to do that's particular to ourselves and our stories. Like I said, story sharing is so important as part of that process, but we want to check ourselves and ask, where is that belief coming from that only the individual counts here in this system? And has that helped me? Has that hurt me? Is it something that I want to keep doing? Are there ways that I want to now turn toward other people who share different kinds of wisdom? Is it one lineage of wisdom that I'm interested in? Is it many? Right? Because, like, even in Taoism, this idea of there's this beautiful line of that water gains power as it goes lower, right? That the river holds less power than the ocean because the ocean is lower than the river. So the river is the individual. The river holds quite a lot of power, but its power really comes to fruition when it becomes lower than. And it's in the coming lower than, it's in the becoming of the ocean, it's in the intermingling of the individual with the whole that the power really starts to reveal itself. But it's not going to happen up there when the river is the individual. It's going to happen sitting in the depth and like the massive body of the whole of the ocean.
Beautifully said. You're speaking poetry. We love it. With what you're saying, let's shift gears. How does embodying the goddess help us change directions or improve our lives, being, what's going on in the world right now in the current state?
If we look at the history of what's happened in religion and spirituality, and the fact that we've fallen in love with death practices, transcend the body, move beyond the body, take Mahasamadhi, which is to even release the body to die. And this is, in some traditions in Jainism and yoga, this is called yogic suicide, right? To like become so advanced in your spiritual practice that you leave your body behind. The traditions that I'm talking about advocate for the opposite, which is all of a sudden turning toward the pulsation, turning toward the body. It's not better than transcendence. It's exactly as important as, because the heart expands, contract, pause, expand, contract, pause, the breath, expand, contract, pause. The expansion and the contraction, the pulsation is exactly as important as the pause. But because we've been trying to go up and out, and I can paint the picture, if we look around us at the world around us, we've now valued people that are trying to physically go higher and higher away from the skin of the earth, building buildings, and then we put our most important people where? At the top of the building, closer to the light. This is a light and transcendent system. And then from the top there, they hold all the power. And from all that power at the top of the building, they get to shout down and tell us all what to do. When you include the body, when Mother Earth is exactly as important as Father Sky, when Mother Earth all of a sudden is the pulsation of reality, you can come down off the building and sit on the ground. And when you're sitting on the ground, the perspective is very different. You can look around at Mother Earth, and instead of extracting from Mother Earth, you can look around and honor, my body is not different from the body of the soil. I have a master's degree in nutrition. My body is not different from the food I eat and the air that I breathe. I can stick my fingers in the soil and receive information and antidepressant properties through my skin. And the fact that we think that we can somehow take this body and launch it away from Mother Earth, away from the earth, is just mad. It's madness, right? What is the body even made out of? The body is an open sieve to the elements. The body is making 2 million red blood cells every second and destroying 2 million red blood cells every second. The moment we honor that this body is the source of creation, that this body is creating and recreating itself in every moment. And I do have 2 children. I felt in real time the human body building life out of the human body. And yet, then I go and I read a spiritual text that says only the soul matters, and the body is basically just a container for the soul. But the soul is a theory. It's not concrete. Can't be touched. What can be touched is the warmth of my skin. What can't be touched is something my brain has made up and then launched into theory, launched into a mental space that has no bearing on the reality of the unfolding of this human form. Because when I'm sitting on the earth, when I'm actually sitting with my feet on the earth, and I'm sitting around a circle, because it's going to have to be a circle if I'm talking to people, then all of a sudden I'm engaging with the elements. And that's where I don't have to shout to hear you, and you don't have to shout to hear me. We can speak to each other. If we go lower down into the earth, into the cave, we might even be able to whisper to each other, right? And it's the getting quieter and the getting closer to the earth where the sacred starts to reveal itself in a way that it's been injured, it's been violated, the body has been violated. Only this body's okay, that body's not okay. Only this experience is okay, that experience, and the fluids that come off of this body, not okay. So these are some of the things that you want to pay attention to in religious scripture. Why is the body denied? Why? Because you got to get past the body if you're going to launch yourself up and out at the moment of death. But guess what? Right now, I'm alive. Now, at the moment of my death, I can engage in these transcendent practices perfectly okay. But I'm looking around me, and life is not a very happy place for a lot of people. The only way to come into appreciation and love for our fellow humans is to acknowledge that we have lives, and those lives are being lived, and that how we treat the earth is how we treat our bodies, and how we treat our bodies is how we treat the earth. And I'm not going to respect the earth if my religion doesn't respect my body. But I am going to respect the earth if my religion does respect my body. So I think of this as embodying the goddess, because the goddess represents pulsation. She doesn't just represent Mother Earth, that is one form of the goddess, but the goddess is actually described as sound vibration. She's described as the word. So, what is the word, right? When God spoke, he spoke the word. And what does he do with that word? Then he creates light. There was always a marriage between the masculine and the feminine. She, sound, vibration, pulsation, word. He, light, transcendence. When there was a dynamic where both were included, and by the way, in religions, even in Judaism, there was a marriage. Asherah is part of the early, there is a divine marriage where she was honored. And now look at what had to happen over the course of hundreds of years to diminish and suppress that principle. And now, fast forward 2,500 years at where we are today. We're due for a correction. And the earth is reminding us of that correction right now. And I'm simply giving it a symbol. The symbol is return to the goddess. Why am I using the term goddess? I could use the term embodiment, come back to body. There's a historical precedence for using the term goddess because it was the actual goddess that was eradicated and eliminated from so many of these religions. Not all religions, by the way, only some. But those some happen to have a very large voice. So using the term the goddess, embodying the goddess, is a way of correcting history. Hopefully, at some point, we don't need to use those binary terms because it is a binary. It's a binary to use the term goddess. What is the goddess? If the goddess is sound, vibration, pulsation, that's form. And we don't need to use she for that, except historically we do. Historically, we need to understand where that principle and her priestesses were murdered and suppressed. Once that comes back in, we don't need to use those terms anymore. Now we can say the transcendent experience and the embodied experience are the same thing. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you for that. That's beautiful. And you're right. The marriage between masculine and feminine has always been there. We see that yin and yang principles. It's very ancient. Even Hinduism spoke of it. You're right. And then at some point in time in history, it was beneficial or it was to the liking of a certain agenda that the female or the feminine symbols of God were taken out. That could be attributed to our patriarchal world where the man is more supreme than the woman or is looked at as the woman as the assistant to the man. You know, we see this in
Or the
early,
vessel.
or the vessel. You're right. You know, we see this in early scriptures, like in the Abrahamic faiths, you know, how they describe Eve really tells you how they viewed women and how they wanted women to behave. And then you go a little further. I don't know if you're familiar. Maybe you are. You seem very knowledgeable. Edith, or the first woman, was not Eve, but someone else. And they casted her out because she was not obeying and she was not the ideal partner. She was wild and independent. And this was from the man's perspective, obviously, not mine, but that's how they viewed her. And then so they had to create another figure so that women could look up to that figure and say, I should be like that, not like Edith, who was the first woman symbolically, or that first form, like you're saying, that first representation of embodiment of goddess, feminine, spirit, even, right? This is so powerful and deep. My question to you is, with the embodiment of the goddess, the coming back to the body, what are your thoughts on the embodiment of trauma that is, you know, very complicated? So coming home to the body is like coming home to a very loud and disorganized house, right? And that could feel overwhelming to someone, maybe even push someone to not come home or come back to the body because it just seems overwhelming, all these things, depending on your culture, your gender, you know, where you are at geographically in the world under whichever politics and domain, you know, these things are all affecting our body. And these are attacks on our body, right? Very much so in many different ways. What would be some words maybe of encouragement or enlightenment for people to realize that coming home to the body is worth the journey, as difficult as it may be?
I'll just name that this patriarchy didn't benefit just men. It benefited very particular men because only a very certain group of men won out in the patriarchy. Now, I would argue that patriarchal religion and patriarchal history has injured all men and women equally. It's not just like a gender war. This isn't like women have lost out and were suppressed and were sexually put in their place, and they were. But there was no tolerance for men either to listen to the body, to honor the sacred embodiment either. You were, and still are in many parts of this world, loved by your family. It's dangerous to not be loved. And doesn't Hafiz say that everyone we meet, aren't we saying, can you love me? Right? So it's dangerous to not agree with what culture is telling us. And it's dangerous for anybody, whatever your sex, gender, race, or culture is. So I would say the patriarchy is more of an energy than it's an energy of dominance. It's an energy of a priestly class that says, I'll tell you what, I'll talk to God on your behalf, but you now have to pay me in exchange for that. And by the way, there's worthy iterations of this, right? Like, there is some beauty in some of this exchange, but not when it gets corrupted, where I have my phone on, I can talk to God, but in exchange for that, now you all have to listen. Right. So that's the dominator energy, is that like now you all have to sit down and toe the line, or else my God's going to punish you through me. So that injures a lot more than just women. That injures children, injures pretty much, I would say everybody loses in this system. So trauma, the way that, and I teach trauma informed trainings, yoga teacher trainings, part of what I study is the trauma response. But I also study it from an energetic perspective, especially as a non-dualist, I believe everything is divine and that I am the expression of that, issuing forth from the heart and returning to the heart. So trauma doesn't exist out there. It exists in here. And it exists where in here? It exists in my thoughts, in my emotions, in my energetic body, and especially in my physical body. And when somebody is processing through trauma, a lot of times they will have what's called an abreaction, which is a shaking or a pulsing or a releasing of a trauma, which involves pulsation, right? Because pulsation is the map of reality. But pulsation is laughter, pulsation is crying, pulsation is all the things. This is embodiment. Embodiment is pulsation. Trauma gets stored in a very physical way, and we can look to some trauma experts. Dr. Richard Miller is one that we work with in our group. In our group, he started the integrative restoration I-REST systems, where you really start to investigate from a place of spirituality. I was never broken to begin with. I am whole and complete. Now, if you start from the concept, I am whole and complete, and you don't have to believe it yet, but you start from this, like, I'm willing to entertain this idea, I'm whole and complete. Now the journey of our friends can begin to reflect that mirror back at us little by little. And it takes time to go through the trauma response. But the way that I look at trauma is that we have 4 major trauma streams that we carry in our body. This is such a small perspective, and I'd love to hear what your perspective is on this. From what I've seen in people, trauma can be collective. We're picking up on the whole. We're picking up on the collective. There's a lot of collective trauma happening right now, and it gets echoed and it gets picked up all around us. It's ancestral. We carry it in our genetics and epigenetics. What my grandmother experienced, what my grandfather experienced, the pulse into the body, the cortisol washing through brilliant people talking about this right now. So the ancestral trauma, there's also, I believe, past life traumas. So a kind of more effervescent, like I've been here before, but I can't really name it, but I feel like I've had this experience before. We could call that more like the mystery, right? But as somebody who does remember, I do have certain past lives that I remember as clear as I remember my childhood. I'm not going to discount that for people. And then we have this life's trauma. And all of these other ones are going to show up where? In this life's trauma. What has happened to me in this life from before I was born, perinatal, prenatal, this natal period, and then as I grew? What are the messages my culture gave me? What are the messages my caregivers, my direct caregivers gave me or didn't give me? What are ways that I've responded to that? And the greatest tool we have is curiosity. Curiosity, like I said in the beginning, begins to unpeel those layers. I don't call triggers triggers because I think that language really matters as a devotee of the goddess and naming the goddess's sound vibration. For me, language really matters. And I don't call this by a trigger because a trigger can only happen in a weapon. And when a trigger is pulled in a weapon, usually a gun, when it's pulled in a weapon, what comes flying out can't be stopped. You cannot stop the thing that was just pulled. So once the trigger is pulled, the thing that comes flying out, the arrow, the bullet, whatever, you can't work with it. It's just gone and it's doing injury, right? But if you reframe the trigger as an activation, I have an activation. Now, all of a sudden, you can slow down around the activation and you can get curious. Instead of, let's say, like something happens and I have a response, I'm active. I just got activated by that thing that person said. Well, that's not a runaway train. I can stop and pay attention to the activation and go, okay, this is good information for me. What's my response to it? Why am I having that response? Are there layers to this response? Is there a core thought in here? Because if it's an activation for me, pretty sure there's something here for me to learn, to look at. Now, all of a sudden, what have I just done? I've just created something called agency, sovereignty. It's now in my power to look at my activation. And is there anything more powerful than realizing that we have the power ourselves to look at our traumas and address them and listen to them and speak to them and hear them and engage with them directly? Like whole, I posted something a couple weeks ago that got a little bit of pushback, um, saying that we can't heal each other. We can hold the space for each other to heal. As somebody who's in this world as a yoga teacher, it gets projected on me a lot that like maybe I can heal you, right? That that would be enacting real violence. You're now setting up a power dynamic where I'm telling you I can heal you. Well, now I have to stand for something. Now I'm holding power over you. And I've just robbed you of your experience and your right, your fundamental human right to heal yourself. I can give you the tools. I can share with you what's worked for me or not worked for me. You can ignore that. You can pay attention to that. But once you realize that you have it in you to scan the landscape, and by the way, you have to work pretty friggin' hard, right? This is not, I've had to work really hard to look at my activations. This is hard work. But you know what's harder? Is not doing the work. Not doing the work is much harder than doing the work. But if you do the work and you realize, oh my gosh, I have an activation right now, then all of a sudden, as hard as it is to look at that activation and root into that core belief, and I have two core beliefs, I'll name them. One is, I'm not good enough. They're always simple statements. And the second one is the opposite of that, which is, you're too much, don't be you. So it's like, you're not enough, and then also you're too much. And depending on what the activation is that somebody out there is saying to me, it's probably going to come down to one of these two core beliefs that I carry. And I don't know what it is for other people. And please, I would love to hear what your take is on all of this. Usually we have core, like very core in yoga, it's called vasana. Some people call them samskaras, but like it's a vasana. A vasana is like that entry level core belief from which everything comes. What do you think?
Thank you for that. That was beautiful. I love the visual comparison between activation and triggering. Never thought about it like that. And that's very helpful as a perspective of framing this stuff, like changing the language. Here on this podcast, we're always talking about different languages. And it's important to understand people come from different walks of life and develop their own languages. Even going back to what you were saying, when someone says in the academia world, I've come across something new. Now, well, maybe it's not new, but maybe you're framing it in a relatively new language, And it's always important for me, especially in my own work, mainly theopoetics, to see God in everything, similar to you, to see God in a cup of tea, to see God in a pillow, to see God in an animal or a plant, to see God in a moment, a breeze. My own practice helps me try to become the ocean, like you mentioned before, instead of the river stream. Being the ocean is a lot harder because you have to include everything else. You have to empathize. You have to consider, you can't be as selfish when you're embodying this ocean mindset. The river can be very selfish because there's a very thin stream. It's like, look at me go, and everyone's like, yay, But when you hit the ocean, it's like, that thing is massive. Forget about it. How are we going to traverse this? And it's so, I love that. I love looking at the practical symbolism of how we engage things in real life. That's why for me, personally, astrology helps me as another layer or form of seeing life, symbols and stuff. And just to see that in conjunction with things that are happening naturally, it's like, oh, wow,
Why is
that's
astrology always right? I
right.
swear, I know nothing about astrology, but I'll be having just any kind of a day, and somebody will be like, "Hey, Cynthia, this is what's going on with the stars," and I'm like, "Damn, again, it's right. It's always right. Oh, whatever's going on." Maybe I should learn about astrology so I'll like have a little bit of a heads up of what's about to come.
Yeah, it's true. It's very symbolic,
Mhm.
talking about the planets, for example, like we don't see them physically, but going back to the energy practice, it's there, right? And it's affecting us. Space is so much larger than we thought. Life is so much larger than we thought. Life is beyond Earth. It's just, maybe it's not cut out for us to go beyond Earth. Like we have our place, and in this grand, massive thing we call the universe, space. We're not the only ones. We can't be, but staying on Earth, I believe what you're saying is so true. Where Earth is our home, Mother Earth, it's like a caregiver protecting us, nurturing us. To leave her is to then take on this sort of masculine role that I feel I'm so independent and so individual that I can escape the universe. Like I can be separate from the universe. And
And then I
so
can go colonize it.
thank you. Exactly. It gets crazier and crazier. It gets more extreme, right? And we can see that, like you said earlier, some individuals with resources are trying to do this already. So it's part of the humanity, right? It's part of the ocean. There's a part in the ocean that smells and moves and looks a certain kind of way that the rest of us are just like, I don't know about that, but it's part of
But
us.
they're returning to the heart too. I mean, like, this is there's a humility. There was a certain past life that I tumbled into remembering at a certain time where I had a moment where I was like, "Oh, this is something we all go through. We have to go through the absolute insanity, the madness and the hubris and the arrogance and if I think that I'm separate from that, then I'm perpetuating it. But if I can sit and really take a look at it where it hurts, where it's festering, and maybe apply a little bit of curiosity to it and a little bit of love to it, all of a sudden that too, that too is included in the pulse of life. And it gives me good information also. Like, so much of our spirituality, because of this transcendence bias, a lot of times it's kind of like we're taught to beige wash reality. Oh, it's all fine. It's all good. It's all, like, it's all beige. I'm not allowed to have a personality. If I have a big personality, then I'm clearly not enlightened. That's not the reality of Earth, right? We're working with a full palette of colors. And when we see that other people are working with a full palette of colors too, we can do a couple things. One is we can honor, okay, we're working with a full palette of colors here. Two, I can now decide whether I agree with you or disagree with you. And I'm not less spiritual for being like, no, thank you. Stay away from me. I'm not into it. Like, I'm good with it and no, right? So boundaries are part of a very healthy, very deeply awake, very embodied practice of spirituality. If we don't know what our boundaries are, if we're not in a holy no thank you, then we're not actually honoring the heart, because saying yes to this heart is also honoring the sanctity of it. And it's perfectly okay to look at some of the things that are happening out there on this earth right now and say, mm-mm, I'm not okay with that. And this is why. In fact, the deeper the people that I know get into spirituality and non duality, the more prone we become to becoming activists. There's an ethical call of the heart that starts to really call when you're not excluding lived reality from the divine. When the divine is the lived reality, then all of a sudden my right to experience that for me, I'm going to look around at the world and say, hold on a second. Why does that person not have this right? And what can I do about that? Because I see myself reflected in that. So what can I do about that? It's very important that we not beige wash reality, that we do look at those parts of the ocean that are a little festery and go, I think it's time for a change. And what can I do about that change without building more trauma, without building more activation? The Bhagavad Gita has such a powerful teaching in this, to do your work without being attached to the results of the work. When you're attached to the results of the work, you create suffering, you create metrics, you create goals. But when you do the work and you show up again and again and again to the best of your ability, and you're open to learning, and I'm constantly having to learn. I stumble and fall all the time. I stumble with my words, I stumble with my actions. But then it's like, okay, where can I improve that? And where can I turn toward that aspect of the ocean to, like, try again? And where can I try again?
Yeah, we empathize with that very similarly. We go through the same thing. It's not an easy path, when people decide to follow a spiritual path for themselves. The answers will not lead you to the world's riches as we see on TV. I don't drive an expensive car because I'm more spiritual. I don't live in a more expensive house because I'm deeply spiritual. It seems like there's an interesting relationship. The more you go spiritual or become yourself, the more you find that, it's harder to keep up with the Joneses, and it's harder to compare yourself, and say, why do they have and I don't? Or it just becomes something like you're just satisfied. You're content. I'm at peace. Like, it's not that you're high on happiness, right? Because happiness is temporary. You're at a point of just inner peace. You found something that keeps you grounded and keeps you calm and stable, because there's always going to be storms and chaos around us, right? Like, when you look at space, for example, how many meteors and asteroids are hitting or aimed at the earth at any given time, right? And the powers that be, nature, has created layers of protection for us. We're not doing this as humans. Like, it's just put in place and it's protecting us from these things. Chaotic things are happening out there that we can't control, right? Like, the earth is moving in such a way, all the other things are moving in such a way. Like, no one's controlling how it's moving. It's just moving, but somehow everything is in relationship with each other so they don't collide as much, right? Like, and so there's this give and take. Like in astrology, like if there's a planet that's closer to the earth, that energy is affecting us, and then we look at it and say, oh, how is it affecting us in this time? Maybe it could be pushing us to be emotional, maybe pushing us to rekindle past issues. It really is interesting to me how, just looking at these symbols and looking at this energetic relationship, not just between planets, but people, man. Like, you start to realize people most times are in their own world, and that's a weird thing. I know. Like, most people would think, well, I'm standing right here. You didn't see me. And it's like, people are in their own world, and they've come to find that they have their own suffering because of desires, right? They're caught in that process, which is very complicated. And no one really frees themselves entirely, right? But we can only reduce as much as possible, right? We try to reduce our desiring so that our suffering can
But
be
why?
reduced.
See, there is the transcendence bias. We should reduce our desire. In certain schools of tantric non-duality, the highest form of spirituality, and by the way, desire, we want to now define that because defining this term is very important. But in certain schools of tantric non-duality, especially through the teachings of a teacher named Abhinavagupta, he teaches that the highest form of recognition of the heart, the highest form of divinity, the highest form of practice is immersing oneself in art. Why? Because when you're immersed in art, when you're immersed in beauty, when you're immersed in the desire that comes of beauty, then there's a moment in the beauty. There's a moment when you're sitting in the theater production, when you're reading the poetry. There's a moment when you are creating the poetry. There's a moment when you're sitting in front of the great work of art, or you're eating that great meal, or you're experiencing intimacy with another. There's a moment of total cessation of being where you're so where the saturation of satisfaction leads to an absolute stillness and a total receptivity of that beauty. We usually blow right past that point, and that's what we can call desire. Desire is like the craving of having like 3 more bites of the chocolate cake. But there's a moment that we're really looking for in an experience of beauty, which is to rest, to find repose. The term is vishranti, to find repose, absolute repose in the beauty of that. And desire is kind of like the big bad wolf in spirituality because you're playing with fire. But in some traditions, desire is not the problem. Desire is what we're enacting at all times. We're enacting the creative desire of the divine to be in form, to be in pulsation. We're enacting the creative desire of the imagination to with and as reality. The problem is when we think that we're going to gain something out of that desire, when we become transactional, and it's really a problem when we now barter away. This is really, I have a whole chapter of this on my book. Desire is a problem in the divine feminine, reframed, because it's what happens when you give away your heart, your current peace and happiness, for a projection into the future or into the past. So desire or attachment has nothing to do with renunciation. Renunciation is what the patriarchy of spirituality calls, is what that is non-attachment. Non-attachment is when I leave my family, I leave my kingdom, I go off into the woods. There's a whole period of life, maybe after I've done my job, I leave. That's called renunciation. That's not called non-attachment. So now you have this patriarchal model that has the renunciation is non-attachment. Okay, from the divine feminine perspective, where is my current peace and happiness? If I really look at desire, what is desire? There's the desire of launching away or giving away my current peace and happiness for something that doesn't exist. There's the positive in the future, the desire, I want a better job. I'll be happy when I'm going to give away my happiness. I will be happy when I will feel peace when I'm enlightened because that enlightened guy looks really happy. So now I'll be happy when I'm enlightened. I'll be happy when I have the car. I'll be happy when I get the better job. I'll be happy when my kid gets an A, when my kid gets that award. I'll be happy when I lose 10 pounds. I'll be happy when. This is like really a problematic form of desire. In the negative, we have worry and anxiety, but it's the exact same thing, isn't it? Worry and anxiety is desire. Worry and anxiety is, I can't wait until that thing is over. I can't wait. I'll be happy when the test is over. I'll be happy when I no longer have that thing in work hanging over my head. I'll be happy when my kid gets the good grade. I'll be happy when worry and anxiety. Worry and anxiety is desire, but it's the opposite side of the coin. I want this thing to be done. Not I want this thing, but I want it to be done. So it's the positive and the negative form. But we project our desire into the past also. I was so much happier when I was so much happier when I was in college and I had total freedom. And like, you weren't on my case to do the dishes, whoever you are, right? Like, I was so much happier then. Well, that's not actually true, is it? Or you can call it shame. I would have been happier now, except that I experienced this terrible thing in the past. If only I had known. I would be happy if I had known, right? So there's the fact of what we experience, and then there's the giving away of our happiness for a story that exists in the positive or negative in the future, or in the positive or in the negative in the past. And this word desire is extremely important to unpack because there's a positive form of desire. There's a positive form. It's called, some teachers, Nisargadatta Maharaj, for example, calls it earnestness, the desire to return to the heart, the desire to return to the divinity within. It is a form of desire. So desire can be holy. Desire can be the feminine herself unfolding into an as pulsation, or it can be the way that we've just given away our peace and our freedom. So even just understanding what our bargaining statements are, speaking of trauma, this goes back to, if we can understand what our bargaining statements are, because I enact my bargaining statements all the time. I would have been so much happier if that thing hadn't happened. Okay, now, since that thing happened, let me look at what's happening right now. When you get clarity over what's really happening now, you might realize that there's no hope for your happiness right now. You might realize, oh, I'm in a bad situation. I'm in a bad situation. This whole time I'm like, I would be happy if, but I need to get out, right? So it's a reality check. It's a very powerful tool to enact in a life, because all of a sudden, when you realize I've been bargaining away my peace and my happiness, and I have no hope in the present moment of getting it, things might change. You might need to change something. But desire itself is the great teacher. Desire itself can be used toward tremendous beauty, can be used toward tremendous embodiment, so long as it's anchored in the present moment.
Powerful, deep. You definitely schooled me today, or offered something very valuable for my own toolkit. Excuse me. Thank you for that. That breakdown. Wow. You're right. Yeah. Desire has two forms. There has to be a light and a dark, right? So that's brilliant. And you said this is in your book. So please, if you are listening
Bartering.
to this, yes, consider getting a copy. And wow, so much more. Th- That's incredible, though. Desire can also be divine. Never thought about it like
Desire
that.
is divine.
Is
Look at
divine.
the desire to be producing. Look
Mm,
at the creativity. You say that you write mythopoetic. What
The
is it? Can you
theo
please tell me
poetic,
theopoetic?
yeah, yeah.
Desire does that.
You're right, yeah.
Desire to create, the desire to express the richness of the heart. I would love to read what you write. I already feel, like, so inspired to read, but the moment you said that, I was like, "What is that? I wanna know what that is." That's desire too, like, I wanna know what you have to say. I wanna know how it is that you're playing with this wild and free life of yours. Share with me. Tell me what it is that you're up to and how you're creating. That's beauty. Now, if we take the bargaining out of it, if we take the okay, desire, this is what I want from you. If we
True.
take the bargaining out of it.
True, that and when you say that, in my mind, I'm hearing ego, from a psychological standpoint too, hearing that ego part, that battling of, do I really know? Or does something else know more than me? And me personally in my spiritual walk, intuition has been that aspect in my life, that connection with God, that direct call, or line you mentioned. And that was very revolutionary for me in my walk, that I didn't need a middleman, so to speak, to relay my messages, my prayers, my concerns. I could just directly connect. And by doing that, then led to these intuitions that I kept getting, and it kept getting stronger and stronger and frequent and frequent. And I just started listening to these feelings, and these feelings knew things that I had no idea, and that in the beginning freaked me out. But then I realized, the framing of this, it's God, it's universe, it's something bigger than us, and we can put whatever names. I'm not here to argue about who how they frame it. We have so many beautiful ways of expressing these things, and how do we look at God and experience God? And I love that. I consider myself a multi-faith student, and I honor many different spiritual teachings, and I love it. I pick from it for myself and say, I love that, and I love that, and I see that, and that works for me. Thank you, But you're right, we have to always go back to traditions before us, because there was lives before us that were here doing things, thinking things, channeling things, embodying things. And we cannot just disregard that and say, well, I have a thought. That's, for me, is very egotistical, you know, ego driven. And if we're going back to that whole thinking like the ocean, that for me is more of a collective. We are all one, or connected, interconnected, but that does not take away our uniqueness. Like you're so uniquely beautiful and inspiring, like you have an aura about you that is magnificent, is rare, a lot of people in this world probably are flocking to you. You're very magnetic. We feel that, and we get that too. But you're right. It's this, and you mentioned it. It's like a fire. I like that. The desire is like a fire, And when we think back to how humans, you know, were introduced to fire, you could kind of play with that symbolically too, right? Like how we were given fire as a gift. Desire could possibly be looked at as a gift. And like you're saying, we're probably misusing it in a lot of different ways. And some of us maybe use it in, divine ways, even spiritual ways that allow them to excel and exceed and keep going. I know for me, my fire keeps me going. A lot of my work is not profitable as much as people think. I have to have a whole nother thing to make sure everything is set up so that I can have the passion and time and desire to do these things that my heart wants to do, which is have these really deep dialogues, these interconnected dialogues, or maybe writing a book or writing poetry, or, stuff like that. Like that's all from my heart. Like I don't do it like you're saying. I love what you said. You're not doing it because there's a reward, like my rewards come to me unknowingly, it's not like I'm expecting that reward. It's like I put that out there, and that was my gift to the world to share, So yeah, thank you for that. You brought up so many things in me, but we are at a period of time which we got to close out. And I want to respect your time and energy. And thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you in this time and space. Is there any closing thoughts? Anything you want to say before we wrap out?
I just want to appreciate what you just said. That was so beautiful. I love that. And I love that you're creating and following that for yourself. To me, that is liberation. Liberation is the enactment of freedom of the heart. And then to put it into the world. Put it into the world. However you do, through art, through poetry, through music, through hanging out with your children, through being through being a caregiver, through there's a million different ways, and no, there's 9 billion different ways, right? Like, it was beautiful to hear yours. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the book releasing. Do you have a published date?
Yes, yeah, it's coming out January 20th through
Nice.
Monkfish, and it's on all of the places. Embodying the Goddess is gonna hopefully be in all of the right places where anybody can buy it.
Amazing, amazing. We're going to try to get a link together and include it in the caption so everyone can have an opportunity to get the book.
Thinking about starting a podcast but don't know where to begin? Do you want to improve the quality of your podcast? Struggling with podcast editing and post production? Want to enhance your podcast's storytelling? Ready to take your podcast to the next level? Discover how Lost Raven Studios podcast consulting can walk with you. Visit our website and schedule a free consultation.